Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel and the podcast. We're here today with the amazing Pete O'Mara Kane, who is the founder of Evolve Neuro. Hello, Pete. Say hi to the listener.
Hello, Jill. Hello to the listeners. You see and hear us.
See and
Everyone,
hear.
my co-founder said, "Are you having a podcast with yourself in the morning?" I said, "What?" He said, "You're doing the Kane Connection, and your name is Kane." I was like, "Oh no, we've been friends for I don't know 10, 15 years, and we're not actually family. So it's always good to let people know you're not interviewing your brother or something like that."
This is true. So my surname is Kane and Pete's is Pete O'Mara Kane. We've actually known each other for God, what, 10 years?
At
Would you
least, yeah.
10 years. So just to give everyone a bit of a background, Pete used to be one of my clients. So I used to work in recruitment and then have my own recruitment company. And Pete worked in it was a mobile
Ad
technology
tech.
company. Yeah, it was an ad tech company. So Pete was one of my clients from many, many years ago in my old life. And then we worked together since I've moved into all of my spiritual and healing world. And Pete has gone on to found an amazing neuroscience technology company. And that's basically why I wanted to have him on the show because I obviously am all about spirituality. I'm all about healing, but I also have a very logical side. And I really love to merge spirituality and science. And so do many of my clients actually. So, I thought Pete would be a great guest to have on the show and just chat about all these things and the intersection of the brain and, how it all works. So, I guess wanted to for the listeners and for the viewers out there, tell us a little bit about Evolve Neuro. Like what do you guys do? How did it even come to be in terms of like this industry and the platform, the technology, what you do?
Yeah, so I suppose it's really good to give the backstory that I don't come personally from a heavy scientific background. So my co-founder he got his degree in psychology, then got a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, and then he went back to study medicine and became a doctor as well. So I'll often say that he's the smart one in the room, and I'm kind of the business guy that does all the kind of basic stuff like fundraising and advertising, marketing, sales, the important stuff, but it's a different part of the business. And since we've known each other, I've always been interested in the human mind and psychology and so on. And that's probably the area that led me down my own path and journey, which was much more science focused, but with this acceptance or this belief that there is spirituality is different for every person. We all have our own experience of that. And while I might not believe in religion or I might not believe in things that everyone else really gets value from, I don't take that away. And I think that's the big thing I've learned from the brain is belief is the most powerful thing. There's a really classic phrase that if you believe you can or believe you can't, you're probably right. And that delivers in every aspect of life. And if you believe that your religion or your spirituality brings you peace, then it will. And if you believe it doesn't, it will bring you pain. And that's just the way we're built. So I wanted to understand the brain. I probably like so many people, I got a little bit obsessed with things like Huberman during COVID and among lots of other things that people all got obsessed with in that period for good and bad reasons. But I went down this very scientific psychology, neuroscience path. And I met my co-founder, Dr. Michael Keane, and he had been in this space for 20 years. So to give you a quick summary of what we do, and then I can give you more examples from athletes and C-suites and different things.
So,
We use something called EEG to measure brain function. So EEG is super interesting. It's actually 101 years old, the technology. So people assume anything with the brain is really novel. But this technology was invented by a guy called Hans Berger in 1924. And I think you'll love this story. So he was trying to prove that twins could communicate through telepathy. So
what's
he had this
that?
belief. Yeah, right.
Or-
So, and to be clear, he was probably on the extreme fringes of psychiatry at the time. So he was seen as a bit of a quack.
Yeah.
And he would get two twins, obviously, and he would put them in his lab and he would put this cage around them that could measure electricity. And what he was trying to see is, if he could get one to think of a number and another to think of the same number, would the electricity somehow show that it's communicating? And essentially, like many discoveries, there was a mistake or an accident, and the cage just fell on one of the twins, not in a bad way, just touched their skin. And as soon as the sensor, which was looking to pick up electricity, touched the skin, he started to see a reading. And because obviously our brain is all electricity, when you think of all the different brain waves, theta, alpha, beta, they're different electrical waves that have different characteristics. So by fluke, he realized, oh, there's something here. If I put the electrodes and the sensors on the skin, I can measure something. And no one believed him. For years and years and years, no one believed him. He had to break into the psychiatry societies with his machine, and you used to have to put people's feet in water to ground them. And he'd roll them in and he'd drop them and he'd say, look, and he'd put the sensors on, and the monitor, like I suppose very old school sensor would start to move. And people would just assume this guy he's losing his marbles. It's quite a sad story, actually. In the end, he committed suicide as he got into it later in his life because he just wasn't believed.
Like
And
a lot
then, as is
of
often
days ahead of their time, right?
massively so. I mean, he had a lot of other. He's an interesting guy. If people want to read about him, Hans Berger, he
I'm
kind of
gonna.
had some flings with the Nazis as well, which it's hard to know if that was forced upon him or not. So, he's got a fairly checkered past,
Mhm.
but certainly this aspect, which was before the rise of fascism in Germany, was very much him as an experimenter, and he created what has now become this whole field of neuroscience and this whole field of brain measurement. And I suppose its most common use now is in sleep. So if you ever have a friend that's really struggling with sleep and they have to go into a sleep lab, they'll put what looks like a big swimming cap on their head, and they have sensors all over it. They usually have 19 sensors or 36 sensors, sorry, 18 or 36, generally speaking. And those sensors are measuring the brain waves and they're measuring sleep. So sleep, because it's so consistent in terms of the different waves, the different stages of sleep, it's really easy to measure to the point now that, your Garmin or your Whoop can give you a fairly good and pretty accurate indication of sleep. But
Mm.
with EEG, you can go a lot further. So you can get the detail of how your brain is behaving at rest. And obviously, if you're not getting into deep sleep, you're not getting into REM sleep, they're the things that you can see because your brain is not in those right states. So that's the most common use for it. And what we've done is taken that very clinical work and we've brought it into sports and business. So we work with Premier League teams, we work with 25% of the teams in the English Premier League now. We work with individual players, with coaches. We work with UFC fighters, golfers, and then lots of businesses and CEOs people that want to, I suppose people a bit like me who they want to understand the science of things a little bit better and they want to know about the mechanisms. And they're kind of maybe sick of all we would call it fridge magnet philosophy, that stuff like, if you win your morning, you win your day. It's like, well, what does that mean? What if I have a bad morning? What if I've got kids and they have a meltdown at 7 a.m.? Does that ruin my day? Is my day over? And of course, it's just understanding that you can reset at any point in the day. They're all cognitive processes and it's all psychology, but we look at it from the foundational level, which is the brain itself. So that's quite an in-depth explanation, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a sense of what we do.
So give an example, like a tangible issue or benefit that one of your clients would have. Like what's the A to B essentially for them in their journey?
Yeah, so if you think about, let's use sport. Sport is a really
Yeah.
easy example to
Like
start with.
high
So, I mean, if I
performance,
take
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, high performance generally is it's a really easy area to think about because everyone kind of gets it. Everyone gets what a footy player or a cricketer or a golfer is trying to achieve, even though it's quite narrow. Their focus is very narrow. They're trying to hit a ball into a hole or over a bar or whatever. But actually, everything that goes around it is really complex. And we had this sense that an athlete's brain is going to be something really different. Their brain is going to be really unique, and the different brain areas will show up in unique ways. And there'll be an athlete brain versus a normal brain. It's just not the case at all. They're all just like we are. They all have anxiety, they all have worries, they all fight with their partners or their parents or their children, whoever it may be. And what you realize is so much of a professional athlete or a CEO, so many of their problems are just the same problems that most of us experience every day. So if you take a layer back and think about our experience of the world, it all comes from our brain. Everything we do, when I move my fingers, it's obviously my brain. My perception of what's around me, the colors that I see on a daily basis, that's a filter, that's my brain. Your eyes are actually the only part of your external organs that are part of your brain. So your eye initially, millions of years ago, was sunk right back, and that's why we have eye sockets. So your eyes are actually directly connected and are part of your brain. So there's a filtering system. So, if you and I walk into the same room and see a piece of art with lots of different colors, we'll see different things. You'll notice different colors, you'll pick up different things. And, even if you think about things like intuition, your intuition and my intuition are completely different. They all come from the brain. That, in my opinion, and again, I'm open to discussion on this, but
Yeah.
everything is a consequence of how our brain works and how it delivers the world around us. So if we just accept that the brain is, you might call it the CPU of modern life for each of us, once you accept that, you can say, well, if I can measure the brain, then maybe I can improve it. So I'll just give you a specific example. So we were working at football club, so Everton Football Club, so one of the poorer performing teams in the Premier League. And we gave them, the story, and they probably didn't believe us. They kind of said, yeah, okay, maybe, we'll give you a few academy players and you can do your measurements. And, I think they were placating us a little bit, but there was the head doctor was really interested. He had this confidence, but all the coaches were a bit more old school and they're like, this is nonsense. So when we went to the club, they normally what you would do is if I was meeting a new client, you'd have a semi-structured interview, you'd get them to fill out some questionnaires, you'd do some psychometrics, you just get a baseline like you would do in any form of psychological and neurological support. But what the club said is, we're going to give you four players and you have to tell us what's wrong with them. And we're like,
Okay.
well, it's not really how it works, but we can do it because it's just data. It's just brain data. We can give you a good indication of what's going on for each of these young guys. And they picked four boys. So all between 17 and 19, all in the academy. One of them had been signed for £1 million. One of them was on the England under 18s, trying to get into the England under 21s. So these are kind of amongst the top percentage of footballers in the UK. And the first guy sat down and you could probably, if I was thinking about intuition, you probably could have told what was up with this guy as soon as he sat down. He had big, sunken eyes. He looked exhausted when he walked in. So without even putting any technology, any cap on his head, you could see he's exhausted. He's obviously got a problem with sleep. So we went through the process and we showed how his sleep, the aspect of his brain that manages sleep was underperforming, basically. So essentially, you put this swimming cap on. And from that, measuring all the brain, it takes about 5 minutes. So you do it with your eyes open for 5 minutes. People think, do you have to do tasks? But it's actually, you just stay completely still because the brain will do the same stuff repeatedly. So it's a bit like measuring your height. Your height is always your height. It doesn't change from day to day. Well, over maybe 20 years it does. I'm pretty sure I'm shrinking. But if we think about the brain, you just need a 5 minute snapshot and that will give us we can give it a complete map then. So we created this map and we said, look, you can see that he struggles with sleep. This is the area of his brain that could potentially be up or down regulated that would help him to sleep. So we could give him some protocols, which would be some little exercises that he would do using our tech before he goes to bed, and it will help him get into deeper sleep. So that was a bit of an easy one. Yeah, and again, as I mentioned at the start, sleep is the most common use for this technology. Second guy sat down, very quiet. Again, we put the EEG on, and you could see the room kind of closing in. Everyone was waiting for what we were going to say. And I say we, it's not me, it's Mike. He's the one doing all the measurements. He's the one with 20 years experience in this space. And he just went, oh, okay. He said, don't want to name the young lad's name, but he said, it looks like you might struggle a little bit with anxiety. And the whole room kind of laughed, and as if, oh, how did they know that? I said, okay, so your anxiety network is unique in your brain because most networks are isolated. They're in individual areas and they cover things like emotion, communication, how you experience different things. The anxiety network is actually a global network, so it covers your whole brain. So when you feel anxious, sometimes you'll feel it in your fingers, you'll feel it in your neck, you feel it in your stomach really commonly, like you'll literally feel sick from anxiety. That's because one of the few networks that covers a huge part of the front of your brain. Most of what we're talking about is frontal, so that's where the thinking, the new part of our brain. And yeah, we said, look, it looks like if we were to see a brain like this, the data suggests that you're someone that would have a higher propensity towards anxiety. So that's the language that we're using. Again, it's very scientific. We're not saying you're already anxious because he might not be. Someone with that brain could have figured out a way to make it work to their advantage, and they could be just unbelievable at managing themselves. But statistically or probability wise, you expect he's struggling with anxiety. And he said, yeah, I really, really get into my own head. And if I have training with the first team, when I'm driving into the training ground, sometimes I'll have to pull over the car on the way and I might vomit outside the training ground because I get so anxious at the thought of it. And the great thing there is you can just say, look, there's no judgment. It's not good or bad. And also, it's not your fault. You're just anxious. You've got an anxious predisposition. Maybe it's your childhood. Maybe it's your biology. Maybe it's the surroundings that you're in. But we don't mind and we don't judge you for that. All we want to do is give you some tools to help to overcome that. So, and I'll explain how we do that, what the tools are in a moment, but I'll just give you the last example. So, they were all pretty impressed by that. And we said, okay, let's have a chat afterwards and we'll sit down and we'll talk you through a plan. But then the next guy came in, really big, really confident lad. This is a guy they'd signed from, I think, Newcastle for £1 million, which is a lot. He's 17, I think, when they signed him. So it's a very heavy weight to be on your shoulders. So, yeah, people are saying, oh, the £1 million kid or whatever they're saying. And, he's not that good. And, all the kind, you can imagine the stigma attached to it. And he's a great player. But we sat down. I hadn't met him before. I wasn't aware of his career. And again, straight away, there's one particular area that lit up. So you always want to be a little bit gentle when you make assertions about someone. So Mike said, okay, well, if I was to see a brain like this, and he said, I'm not saying this is you, but if I were to see this in some people, I would think they might have a slight challenge in holding back their anger. They might have a little bit of an issue with anger, control, that type of behavior. And he just kind of smiled. And then one of the coaches butts in, really unhelpfully, I'll add. And he goes, oh, yeah, he keeps getting sent off. So he keeps getting red cards. And sometimes it's because he throws an elbow into the defender, and sometimes it's because he has an argument with the referee, and sometimes it's with his own players. He just has a propensity for anger. So he has a diminished control of that part of his brain function. And again, all of these things are areas that you can work on. Like once you can measure it, it's a bit like going to the gym. If you walk into the gym and you're doing your squats and you're not getting the results, you're going to focus on that muscle. You're going to focus on your glutes, your thighs, or whatever it is. The brain is the same. It's much smaller. It's much more precise. And we're still learning a lot about it. I think the latest data is we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the brain. So, it's not surprising that we still don't know a lot. And it's not surprising that we have modeled things like ChatGPT on neural networks, but we don't fully know how ChatGPT works because we don't fully know how the brain works. So it's all quite exciting, but people get confused and they can't explain it. So yeah, once we've got that data set, then we can say, okay, we've taken a look into your brain. And I can't tell you how many times someone will say, it's like you're reading my mind. You say, well, yeah, we kind of are, right?
Yeah.
It's as close as you can get to it. We kind of are. So yeah, it tends to fascinate people when they see the data and we're showing it to them. So it's not just that we're going, hey, Gillian, this is what I think. It's like, this is your brain. Here's a 3D model of your brain. This is the part of your brain that is related to connection. And oh, by the way, you've got a really high propensity for connection. So connection is something that you will naturally be very good at because that's a part of the brain. It's about friendliness, openness, all these different character traits that we think about in psychology, but they all go back to brain areas, and there is literally thousands if you want to really look into it. So yeah, it kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what we do.
I love that. And then you mentioned that once you have this information, once you have this data, how do you then work with these clients, these players? Like what tools or practices and how does it all work? Like what is we've got this, we've got the diagnosis. Now here's how we make it better.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, look, there's lots. If I had an endless amount of time and money with someone, and I could do everything for them, probably in most cases, you could start with all the basics. Like we'll often say, if I just did the measurement, I didn't do anything after that. I just gave someone the measurement, I showed them their brain, and I said, "This is you."
Yeah.
When you go home and you lose your temper, give yourself a little bit of slack because actually there's a reason for that. You've only got a certain amount of emotional reserve. You've only got a certain amount of psychological reserve. You're using that all day in work, and I can show you that from your brain. So if we just stopped there and gave people the insight, for most people, it would be really, really powerful. And I mean, I've seen grown international football players, rugby players break down in tears in these sessions. We had one guy who is very, very well known. He's the manager of a national team now. And he was an elite player. He played in all the top competitions in football, played in World Cups and everything like that. And he's from a really tough background. And when we shared with him, this is how your brain has formed. He's in his 40s now. There's there's no reason. It just has. I mean, there is a reason, but we don't know what it is now because it's already happened. He, when we explained to him, you naturally will have a problem with connecting with people. We're holding on to connections. And he got so upset and he said, "This has been a problem for me my whole life. My biggest regret is that I'm not friends with my childhood friends." And he said, "There's no way you could know that." He says, "Literally no way you could know that." And we said, "Well, we didn't know that. But what we know is how your brain functions and how it operates." So sometimes just that insight, and it's probably about, in its own way, it's probably not that different from when you do a reading with someone and you just give them a piece of insight that they were looking for
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and they just go, "How did you know?" And that's your intuition. That's that you've built this skill over time where you're able to listen to someone and hear things and kind of read them. But what we're doing is we're reading it from a technical, data-driven perspective where we've got, a piece of kit that can do it. So as I say, often if they stop there, that would be a great starting point. That would give them, the classic know thyself. That would just give them this insight on who they are as a person. It removes a lot of shame. It removes a lot of guilt. But most people, when they see this, they go, "Oh wow, what do I do now? How do I fix it?" You don't want to fix it. There's no fixing. It's not broken. It's your brain isn't this thing that you want to constantly hack. It doesn't. I know everyone talks about these things and they talk about dopamine spikes, which is actually from a neuroscience perspective, it's a nonsensical term. Dopamine is in use all of the time. You can raise and lower it, but this idea of spikes is it's just not accurate. It's just common phraseology. Um, and people love to talk about dopamine for a whole bunch of reasons, but the mechanisms are far more complex. And actually, the beauty is in the complexity of them. But when you hear people talking about, "Oh, it's a dopamine kick or whatever," it's just generally not. That's not true. That's not how it works. It's epinephrine, it's adrenaline, it's all the different parts of your brain working together. It's the moment and so on. But anyway, I'll try not to digress into complaining about back onto fridge magnet philosophy. But so we take an individual, like take this young guy that was suffering from anxiety, and then
Yeah.
we'll give him one of our headbands. So that you see these are little headbands.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it there. You literally pop it onto your head.
Yeah.
So these are the much
Love
more
a demo.
mobile. Look at that. Doesn't it look cool? You
Yeah.
get to
Go for
pretend
your
you're
run
some sort of
now.
an odd, but yeah, yeah, yeah. It's almost a headband. We want to put them into baseball caps so they look a bit cooler. But what's really nice is these guys have got sensors on them as well. So not the same number. You don't need the huge number of sensors because, as we mentioned, everything is happening at the front of your brain. So a lot of our thinking, our neocortex is all at the front. And we can talk about different parts of the brain if that's interesting too. But We put on the sensor, we connect it to an app that we give the player or the whoever it may be to download. From that app, you can then essentially you have two choices, but one of them is you play games on your phone, but those games are controlled by your brain. So
Mhm.
we will set it up in such a way that when your brain, again, let's use the example of emotional regulation, emotional control, anger management. Anger is an area in your brain. We can measure that area in your brain, and then we can tell when that area is over or underactive, essentially.
What the
So what we
triggers are,
wanted,
like the micro moments of trigger.
yeah, actually it's quite random. This is the strange thing. So, if you've ever been with someone that has anger management issues, what you'll notice is it's hard to predict that. I can see you laughing. So yeah, I think we've all been with one of those there,
We've
maybe
all been there,
ex-partners.
yeah.
Yeah, why did they just fly off the handle? Why are they throwing a cup at me? I don't know. What did I do? So what you'll notice, the human experience is, I don't know why they're so annoyed. I don't know why they got so angry this time.
Mhm.
And your brain is a little bit like that. Say someone that's huge amount of anger issues, someone that's always angry.
Mhm.
Every now and again, something will happen and they'll be completely calm. Or vice versa, you get that really calm person and they stop at a traffic light and someone beeps at them and they go absolutely crazy. So it's quite random. Like, well, obviously there are triggers, and that's a different part. That's the psychology. But from a purely foundational perspective, a lot of this stuff is random. So when we're looking at the brain and we're looking at, say, anger management, we're just going to see what's the propensity for this person to lose their temper. Let's just say it's 50%. It doesn't quite work in percentages. That's not the terminology, but let's just say their standard deviation is that they're more likely than the average by 10 or 20%.
Yeah.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to measure their brain in real time with our bands, and we're going to measure when that part of their brain, by completely by random, downregulates. So it naturally goes into a calm state. And this happens all the time with all the different parts of your brain. They're constantly in flux. Makes us sound like we're all crazy, but I mean, this happens so quickly that it's really irrelevant. And when that part of the brain is naturally in a calmer state, so downregulated, we'll give the user a reward. And the reward, if they're playing a game, will be the character jumps, so they run faster, or the fire gets bigger. Really simple rewards. So
Okay.
that creates reinforcement. So it's the exact same process. Obviously, you've got cats. If someone has a cat or a dog and they're eating food around the table, the animal will tend to come to the table. It's not because the animal is, thinks it's dinner time, although they kind of do. It's that the animal knows that sometimes when I come to the table, food falls off and I get to eat it.
Yeah.
They've learned this kind of, it's like the classic, the way you train a dog. They learn from repetition that if I stay close to the table when the humans are there, something will fall and I get to eat that potato or whatever it may be.
Or if I
Um,
continue meowing at my mother, she will feed me over and over and over again. And no wonder I'm 5 kilos overweight. I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that works for cats as well as it does for children, right? Children keep pestering their parents. If they know on the third attempt they get the chocolate bar, they'll do it 10 times. They don't care. So it's all reinforcement, and our brain is this reinforcement machine. That's why we get into patterns, why we get into behavioral patterns. Our brain loves consistency and it loves reinforcement. What we're trying to do is reinforce a new behavior. So again, we go back to the brain. We're measuring the electricity, we're measuring the brain waves, the connections in different areas. And when initially at random, the brain goes into a more relaxed state for the area we've chosen, again, we'll use anger. So that it's naturally come down a notch or two in anger. We reward the person by the character on their game, completing a jump or something very simple, binary actions.
Yeah.
You can also add things like haptics, like vibration. You need to be very still where you're doing it, so you don't want anything that moves people, but gentle vibration can work. It's still not 100% clear if it's the best way to go, but definitely visual stimulus works well. So then what we've also added is that you can just watch Netflix. So say you're watching Netflix,
Mhm.
when your brain is behaving the way we want it to, your volume and your brightness on your phone will be kind of high. So it'll be full volume, full brightness. So you can consume the show really easily. As your brain goes to old patterns, the volume and the brightness will drop down.
Mhm.
So for you, if I was watching you doing the training, I'm just watching you watching Netflix with the screen volume going up and down. So it looks a bit strange, but actually, after you've done it for 5 minutes, people just get used to it. But what's happening to your brain is really interesting. So it's learning when I calm or I downregulate or in kind of human terms, when I gain more control of this brain area, I'm getting reinforcement. So I'm getting this positive, I'm getting the scrap of food that falls off the table. So I'm getting this
Yeah.
positive reinforcement. And then you go, well, how does that affect them in real life? It's really slow, but gently, slowly, their behavior will start to change. And again, will people still get angry? Absolutely. That doesn't change. Will they get angry when they should get angry? Of course they will. But what the difference is, when they stub their toe or someone bumps into them accidentally, they have now got more control and they can choose whether or not they want to lose their temper. So you're giving people control. And a temper is just one example.
Yeah.
So if I go back to the young lad that we were working with that had anxiety issues,
Yeah.
he was anxiety often leads to everyone has heard of fight or flight, so that's a very common thing.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a third area
Freeze.
called freeze.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think we've spoken, and there's even a fourth, which is fawn.
Yeah.
So fawn
I
is when
teach
you
it
kind of
in my Rebel Psychic school because the nervous system
okay,
and the brain waves and the heart coherence all impacts our ability to receive information. Because when we're in a relaxed
absolutely.
state, it's all impactful. So like I've got a whole module on energy which talks all about
Oh
this.
wow.
I know it very well.
I
Yeah.
feel like I feel now I feel miseducated or not educated enough on what you're doing. But I mean it's you're in the sweet spot when it comes to neuroscience because everyone has heard of fight or flight, and we can measure that really easily. When once you go into those brain activities, once your brain gets into the state of fight or flight, it's very hard to control things. I mean, really, really hard. So someone is in a state of flight, imagine a sporting context, state of fight or flight, or in the most common case is freeze. And freeze doesn't mean that you physically freeze like a rabbit. It means that you do nothing. So if it was a sporting case, it would be the player that has all the ability on the training pitch, but in the games, they don't ask for the ball, they don't make the run, they don't take the shot, they don't try and cross it, they just play it safe. So they're just a 5 out of 10, even though maybe they have the ability to be a 9 out of 10, but they just sit in this safe zone of, I don't want to make a mistake. That's completely control, not completely, nothing is ever complete. And I think anytime you say if you hear someone being absolute about the brain, you should question that. But that's generally speaking is they're in this state where their anxiety has increased, the freeze function has kind of kicked in a little bit, and they're afraid. There's a fear or whatever it is, they're going to make a mistake. And again, it almost doesn't matter what the reason is, but they've lost control over that part of the brain. So for anxiety, we just want to keep it down. Anxiety is great, by the way. People talk about, oh, I wish I didn't have anxiety. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anxiety is what makes you do things. It's a signal that you shouldn't do things. Often when you feel anxiety, there's a really good reason. And when people try and mask it with drugs or alcohol, we all know that's a bad thing. But people try and mask it with their phone, with podcasts, with exercise. Like anxiety is your body telling you something doesn't feel right. And not over amounts, so not too much of it, but small amounts of anxiety are very healthy because it's just a message. It's that, again, it comes back to intuition. It's that feeling you get when you're in a room with someone
Yeah.
and you go, I don't trust this person. Like only 4% of communication is our language. It's all the other things that are happening around us. So anxiety is really valuable. But having uncontrolled anxiety is really unhelpful. So what we did for this young lad is gave him our headband. We gave him a training protocol, which I think was watching. What was the show he was watching? It was something like Family Guy or something. It was just doesn't matter what it is, right? To us, it's just something that you can sit and watch for 15 minutes with the headband on and let the work start to happen. And his experience was, again, slowly. It's a bit like watching hair grow. It happens really slowly, not after one session, but after a few months, he just felt more relaxed. He didn't feel that nervousness going into training. And when he did go into training, he was that bit more confident. He was asking for the ball. He wanted to see everything. So what we'll do, because, sometimes you'll get a coach and they'll say, oh, well, that's just because we've been treating him differently. And it's like, first of all, no, you haven't, because you haven't changed your ways for 40 years. But second of all, let us show you. Let us show you his brain. So we go back in, we do the measurement again, and you can absolutely see this part of his brain that was really overactive is now significantly downregulated. So now he gets to accept that sometimes he will have anxiety, but he can say that's okay. And what we'll often do is, we will layer that with psychological tools. So there's loads of really good tools that can dovetail and they can enhance the experience. So there's different models. So there's the DISC model. There's Kerry Evans, who's the performance coach for the All Blacks. He talks a lot about the red zones and the blue zones and the purple zones and how do you manage these things. And he's got all these really good, simple strategies that he's given to Dan Carter, or, he's given to a school teacher that's working in a high school. So this strategies will work the same way. But what we're doing is we're working on the foundation, on the neurobiology to give them more control. And then on top of that, we'll say, okay, for example, you're going to take a corner. You just take a couple of breaths. It's just 2 deep breaths, just to remind yourself that you're calm. So there's this idea of, this is definitely a Kerry Evans thing, but I think it's really helpful because you can do it in 3 steps. You can do it in 3 seconds. So the idea is, if you're in a situation where you're feeling under pressure, first of all, you have to accept, this all happens in a nanosecond, but first of all, you have to accept that you chose to be in that situation, generally speaking. If we're talking about sport, or if we're talking about your job, if you choose to be an executive, you could have been a bin man. That would have been a lot less stressful. It'd be stressful in different ways, but it would be a different experience. You could have been a lifeguard. Again, most of the time pretty chill, but sometimes very stressful. But the idea is you've made your choices, so now you have to deal with the pressure that's involved. So the first thing you do is step back. Just step back and observe the whole situation. So I'm taking a corner kick. I'm taking a penalty in rugby, whatever it may be. So step back and just accept this whole situation, right? That's 1 second. Step up. So step up to the fact that you made this decision. You've done the training. You've learned how to do the job. You've got the qualifications. And then step in. And it's 3 steps. It's really simple. And once you get good at that, you can literally do that in a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
I was going to talk at an event recently and I could feel this nervousness coming up. And I just said, wait, why am I getting nervous? And I said, it doesn't matter. I'm just nervous. I don't want to stop that emotion. It's already there. First off, I'm gonna accept it. So I put myself here. Then I'm going to say that nervousness is excitement, because I'm excited about what I'm about to do. Step up and I'm prepared. I've read my notes 56 times, probably more than I needed to. Step in. So you step in and then you deliver. And it just creates that psychological break and gives you that little bit of confidence to go, I'm going to go and deal with this problem. And if I circle back to this young lad in particular, so within 3 months of working with us, he was kind of back in the first team for Everton. Within 4 or 5 months, he was playing for England under 21s. And then within about 9 months, he was playing in the first team. So he played in the Premier League, played at the London Stadium in Tottenham, which is, you're talking at the time for soccer fans or Premier League fans, Tottenham were actually doing really well at the time. They're struggling a bit now. But at the time, that was a huge thing to trust him to be in that position in that game. So that's essentially what we do. It's kind of a micro and then the macro, a case study of what it is, but we're training people to train their own brain, to get more control of their brain. And also it's literally brain training, brain measurement, brain training. And then what we'll often find is that if you can improve someone's brain for performance, for sport, you improve it for every aspect of their life. You improve people's day-to-day existence. You improve how they communicate. You think about someone, again, we'll use that joke, but think about the partner that gets angry all the time. If you could just get them a little less angry, but think about all the other versions. Think about the partner that gets anxious. Think about the partner that gets worrisome. Think about the partner that gets, insular and isolated, and they get in on themselves and they get all the different emotions that we all go through, which are completely normal and human. But imagine if they just had a bit more control. That's possible now. And the work we're doing at the moment is we've been collecting big data sets from thousands and thousands of brain scans. We're bringing them to we're starting a project with a university where we want to be able to start predicting things. So now I can put a scan on you and I can say, hey Gillian, this is your brain, this is how it operates. And I can make some suggestions and then we'll work together to figure it out. But we believe that all that data can allow us to predict things. So could you predict disorders? Could you predict people's behaviors? Could you predict, this is not Minority Report. We can't predict crime, for example. Someone asked me
Yeah,
that question recently. Not
really.
yet, but yeah, not hopefully not ever. But you can certainly predict how someone's likely to behave during the course of a day. It's so evident, and so many times people just are amazed by how it all operates and how accurate it is. And again, it's not a perfect science because there's different aspects to our brain, but it's certainly something new that we've got more availability to look at. And I think the next 5 6 years, a bit like we've seen this big rise in AI, you're starting to see this greater interest in the brain just from a social perspective. People are more interested in talking about their brain and their emotions and their feelings. But I don't know, there's something more about the science of the brain that people feel comfortable chatting about. You're going to see this kind of shift now into the understanding of the data. And when you've got, machine learning and AI that's as rapid as it's developing, those things that we haven't been able to figure out, those patterns that are unclear to us, it'll be able to see it much faster. We're pretty confident it's just getting enough data. And, brain scans are not something that you commonly do. It's not like checking your HRV on a watch. So there's a volume, a kind of capacity issue at the front end. So once we get that right, I think we'll see some really interesting results, probably later this year, early next year.
Amazing. I love that. That's so good. And it kind of seems that like the way that the process of the treatment, let's say, is really helping these people break free from, because anxiety and anger and all of that, there's negative emotions, there's negative thought loops, right, that generally happen that get us into that state initially, right, that takes us to that heightened place. So it's like it feels like the process you're doing is breaking those, it's a little bit like the process that I take people through in my healing. It's like accessing your subconscious, accessing those parts of your brain or your energy field that the root cause of the loop or the problem or the dynamic or the pattern is playing out. We get to that and we clear that out energetically. So it's really interesting to see, like, ultimately I'm here to support every person or business or technology or modality that can support people's well-being, their emotional well-being,
Yeah.
because like whether that's their for their performance, whether that's for their general life, like in general, that's what it's here for. And I think you mentioned like to take a deep breath, right? You mentioned that
Mhm.
um as a suggestion to one of your clients. Now, where does something like the breath, like breath work or like meditation come into what you guys do? Does it at all, in fact?
Yeah, I mean, as I said a little bit earlier, if we had an infinite amount of time with someone, we probably wouldn't start with the brain training because there's so many lower hanging fruits for everyone. And I mean, it's incredibly boring, but how are people sleeping? Number one, are you getting a good night's sleep? So important. Then what are you putting into your body? What are you eating? Are you eating well? And listen, I don't think that there's any stigma attached to wanting to have chocolate and so on. But if that's all you eat, obviously that becomes a challenge because it has an impact in terms of your systems and so on. So we would start with the fundamentals, which is, sleep, diet, hydration, exercise. Literally, I mean, I get so frustrated when I think about how many people are struggling and they go to the doctor and the first thing the
Dedicated.
doctor wants to do is, yeah, give them a pill. It's like, and listen, those pills are amazing for some people, just
Yeah.
to be clear.
Yeah.
So a really interesting upshot that we've seen from the EEG actually is that this was from a bit of research that Mike has done. So Mike has just written a chapter for the American psychiatry syllabus. So essentially, he's the guy writing the book for all the people that will be learning about this stuff. So it's about brain interface and brain technology and the usages of it, and also where the research is still not very conclusive. And there's a lot of that as well, to be clear. So there's a lot of people that will say, oh, this doesn't work. And under certain circumstances, it doesn't work. So you should be clear about that. But when you do it in a personalized way, in the right fashion, it's very effective. But when you think about drug usage for things like depression, there's very good evidence to suggest that using EEG for the 50% of people that will have a positive outcome from pharmacological, and it is about 50%, there's often different drugs that they can be given. So there's different mechanisms. There's 2 or 3 different main mechanisms. And if you're suffering from depression and you've tried everything else and you go down this route, actually you could spend 6 months on a drug that will not work for you. And that's a really painful experience because you feel even worse. And then you have a second drug for another 6 months. And then maybe the third one will eventually work. Now, some people get lucky and the first one works, but it's starting to look like EEG could identify which brain area requires the support and which drug will work more rapidly. Not guaranteed, again, because none of this stuff is, but it will give it that indication. So again, that's just another kind of innovative use of brain measurement. But to go back to your question on breath work, I mean, it's all about the body systems and it's all about the states that we're getting ourselves into. So, even a simple thing like the double deep breath, that kind of the psychological sigh, that kind of deep breath in, hold deep breath in, and then letting go. That just has the effect of down-regulating everything a little bit. And sometimes, if a cup is overflowing with water, you don't need to throw all the water out. You just need to stop the water flowing into the top and it will stop. It will just be a nice full glass of water. And it's the same idea. If you can just break that tide, that build up and get yourself to the point where you're no longer spiraling, that can be enough when it comes to breath. Now, there's much more interesting things when you think about breath work specifically. And it's there's so many different areas of breath work now that I think, it could almost have a podcast to itself. But at its most basic level, what we all walk around in this state of semi-stress. We have a prehistoric brain for a modern world that has changed in an unbelievable way in the last 30 years. It's to me, it's kind of just after 25 past 8 in the morning. I've probably looked at my phone 20 times already today. That's horrendous. And I'm conscious of that. And there's WhatsApp notifications, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's the million things. There's the podcast I had on. If I was walking through town, there'd be all the advertisements hitting me. There's
Lots
just
of information. Yeah.
overwhelming. Yeah,
Overload.
we never had so much. It's completely overload. So we're naturally just and then there's your brain as well going, did I get back to that person? What did they think about me? If I don't send that WhatsApp now, are they going to think that I don't like them? And I mean, that's before you even just think about the basics of volume. And then you multiply that by the internet and, the fact that we can go down rabbit holes and learn about things that, we really don't understand, like quantum physics. And you go, God, we're alone in this infinite universe that keeps expanding. And what's it expanding into? Oh my God, my head's going to explode. And then you think, well, why are people stressed out? Well, because they just have their brain is not capable of taking on all this information. So the great thing about breath work is it just brings everything down, brings your heart rate down. Again, I'm assuming we're doing the slower breath work, not the more intense one.
It's
But
slower.
just that process of bringing our heart rate down, reducing our brain activities just by closing your eyes, going into a meditative state. You completely change your brain function. You change the waves. I mean, it's really significant. If you look at it, your brain behaves very differently with your eyes open to your eyes closed, significantly. And you go towards theta, you go towards sleep. That's 3.5 to 7 hertz. That's what we're looking for. That's the big, slow brain waves. And that's where you have this opportunity to be closer to creativity, but more than anything, you're calm. So all those distractions have started to fade away. And just from being in that state of calm, that state of being more relaxed, you're listening to your real thoughts. Maybe you're listening to your intuition, but you're certainly able to just step away from all those distractions, those pressures, those stresses that have been overwhelming you. Your fight or flight is deactivated. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system is coming into alignment. So, often there's things fully understand that lots of people have a negative view on it. I'll just give you a random example that's popped into my head. Something like Reiki, this or crystal healing and so on. And I've thought about them a lot. And I've thought, and again, I'll be very honest, I think, and I've done these things and I've felt the benefit and I still go, this is nonsense. What is it? It doesn't make any sense to me. And why? Because I can't explain the science behind it. But if I just go back and say, it gets you really relaxed, it makes you get out of your own head and into your body. Well, that's enough. That's genuinely enough because we spend so long not in that space. So if it works for someone and it gives them some peace, even for 30 minutes or an hour, and it lets them think about things in a more thoughtful and creative way, it lets them listen to their emotions. And absolutely, we can listen to our emotions. We avoid them all the time. But that is where the benefit of all and many of the Eastern kind of spirituality will come from, in the sense that it's just about slowing down. I mean, if you think of Zen, just as an example, it's basically the practice of quieting the voice in your head. Why do we have a voice in our head? Why do we have two voices? I mean, we don't know the answer to that question. Lots of theory. So the practice of meditation and mindfulness and Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophy is to just quieten that voice and give yourself peace. And that's back from thousands of years ago when we didn't have all the distractions we have today. Now you have the voice in your head, you've got the phone in your hand, you've got the TV, you've got, it's overwhelming. So anything that can bring people down to a more relaxed state where they can be self-attentive, and this idea of compassion, like everyone talks about compassion. So, compassion means to share suffering. This idea that we share suffering, and self-compassion is to share the suffering we have with ourselves. I think it's a great idea, that just to accept that we all suffer, and then to accept that we have to share that with ourselves. But there's another Italian word called conguarde, and that means to share joy. And I just think that's a really lovely balance to compassion. Like, yes, we should have compassion for ourselves and for others, but conguarde is the experience of shared joy with yourself or with someone else. And I know that, some of your work is about physical shared joy with yourself, but also, that's a really wonderful way to live our lives. And you can't do that if you're amped up and, just at the state of constant overwhelm all the time. It's impossible. So getting ourselves using breath work, using sauna, wellness, cold therapy, using healing, using intuition, channeling, crystals. I mean, it really doesn't matter what your mechanism is. The only thing that matters is, does it work for you? And it's like so many pharmacologicals and pharmaceuticals on the market. We don't always know how they work, but people don't care as long as they get the result. So it's like, the placebo is the most powerful drug in the world. No idea why that works. Our brain is so powerful. So if we can just trust that our brain certainly knows something about improving our mental health, then it's about giving it space and not distracting it. Like, for example, today I had a chat with a friend last night, and I've been feeling really overwhelmed with my phone. I feel like I'm looking at it way too much. And she said, why don't you just take 2 or 3 hours, go for a walk? Don't listen to a podcast. Don't listen to music. Just look at the nature around you. And, I'm in a city, so it's not the most beautiful, but there's stuff all around you all the time. And it's just that sense to reset. That's what we need to reset when we have the opportunity. And I know that it's hard for people, especially when you've got family and life pressure, but even 5 minutes before you go to bed, not going straight into putting the headphone in and listening to something, just listening to your body, listening to your heartbeat, taking a few breaths, that will downregulate everything. Just give us a bit of space.
100%. And this is why those simple practices are so key in all of the work that I do. That's the first thing that I'll do when working with a client, is to get them to tune in, to get them to ground, to get them to connect with their heart, get them to breathe so they can actually take a relaxed state, to get into that theta brainwave, because that's where we can access everything. That's like the sweet spot where, the busyness of the mind is out of the way. And God, like you said, so many of the society that we live in the mind. We're so disconnected to
Mm.
our bodies, which means we're so disconnected to our creativity, our intuition, like all the possibilities and the potential that we have because we're so stuck, you know? And yeah, just bringing that down and relaxing the nervous system is foundational. It's so key. You know, again, in my program, it's the first thing that I'm like, guys, you're not doing anything. I'm not teaching you anything to do with intuition or connecting with your psychic abilities or your guides until you master energy. Until you master
Mm.
this, you're not doing anything. Until you understand your nervous system, until you understand why we need to get you into a relaxed state and why we need to shift your brain waves, there's no point. You're not going any further. So that's module one. So yeah,
I love it.
it's so
It's
important.
just, it's like me talking about being able to measure the brain. If people just mastered that, it would be very
Mm,
valuable.
I love it.
People spend their whole lives trying to quieten the voice in their head, or that kind of self-talk and so on.
Yeah.
Even to start that process it's a lifelong pursuit for sure. But and we'll go through good and bad times with it. But I'm really glad to hear that, because I feel like that would be beneficial to anyone, genuinely. Just having a little bit of understanding of your body in a way that makes sense to you. That's a key thing, because not everyone, we all see the world in different ways, but for accepting that these things are beneficial for us is just the first step. And for the people that want to go deep onto the science, that's all there now. We can understand that. For the people that it's more of an emotional or an empathic thing, that's absolutely fine. I don't think for me, no matter how far you go into the science, you shouldn't judge another person's method, because if it works, like I said at the start, if it works for them, we don't always understand it. I mean, I'll tell you a really interesting one when it comes to the brain. We see so many high performers. I mean, like unbelievably high performers, CEOs of businesses worth fortunes, Premier League or PGA golfers. I mean, the peak of what they do.
Yeah.
Many of them have got ADHD. Many. It's really common, because
Really
there's
interesting.
two ways of looking at ADHD. You can think of it like, oh my God, that kid won't sit down. Okay, yeah, there's a little bit of that. But also, for someone that's got an ADHD kid, your job as a parent is just get them to, 17 or 18 with their confidence intact. Just accept that they are going to be wild. Try not to medicate them. Find the thing that they can get obsessed with. Because once they find that, they will be unbelievable at it. Because they'll be ADHD is a superpower. You can get hyper focused on something, right? So, maybe when they're a kid, it's building Lego, that can turn into engineering. Maybe it turns into coding. Maybe it turns into swinging a golf club and just being so obsessed that they'll do it for 8 hours a day. So I think there's so much stigma around things like ADHD. That's been there forever, right? And it actually, for many of the people that have had it, they've just by luck or wisdom, they've found their niche and they've focused on it, and they've been able to just get so good at it, because it is genuinely, like all superpowers. I don't know if you ever read the kind of origin stories of superheroes. When they're first getting their powers, they can't control them, right? They're like, blowing stuff up, or they're
Yeah,
flying
yeah,
into buildings.
yeah.
It's kind of this fun.
Marvel.
And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, how would you control this new power that you've got? ADHD is the same. It is genuinely a superpower, but you don't know how to control it as a kid. So it gets funneled into all these unusual activities. And it's tough for parents, really tough. And you can use things like what we do. Neurofeedback is a really good solution, which avoids drugs for ADHD. There's lots of good data on it. Again, for about 50% of people, it won't work for everyone, maybe a little bit higher. But yeah, find the thing that they love. Just be almost as a parent or as an adult that has it. Be obsessed with finding that thing that they love or you love, and then just do that. Do it as much as you can, because you're going to get so good at it.
I love that. That's actually such a good perspective that I haven't heard on ADHD because you see it everywhere now. Like you just have to look at social media and it's only been really in the last like few years that I'm like, oh, I'm ADHD or I have ADHD or, or
Mhm.
this is my excuse for this or this or this. And it's like you said, actually, can you turn that into a superpower? Because you are going to be amazing at that hyper focus. Find your thing. It's such a
Yeah.
cool way to look at that from a new perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, I've just seen it. I've got all the evidence in front of me, because I've just seen all these super successful people.
Wow.
So, it's to me, and listen, there's people that are very unsuccessful as well, and I've struggled with it, and that's normal. That's the human
Yeah.
condition. But it, like we started the conversation with, it's all about what you believe it to be. And if you believe it is a crux and it's gonna ruin your life, if you keep telling yourself that, yeah, eventually that's how it's gonna happen. But
Mhm.
if you say to yourself, this isn't going to hold me back, this is going to mean, yeah, okay, maybe I won't be super kind of organized in meetings or whatever, but I'll be the person that goes away and spends 4 hours getting the presentation perfect and then practice it and nails it. And then afterwards, I'll say something silly, but everyone gets it because now there's more acceptance. But it's not something that should hold people back. And I think people can wear it as this kind of excuse, and
Mhm.
anything that's an excuse, we need to be really careful about. Like any excuse, you're telling your brain, there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. Well, why are we saying that? Why are we telling ourselves that? Why does it have to be that way? Again, they're all choices. They're
Mhm.
complicated. And that's why you need professionals. And we would always recommend counselors or a spiritual guide or whatever that person feels is right for them. Absolutely, take that support because we all need a bit of help.
Mhm.
But yeah, we don't need to be victims. That's, and again, I should be really careful when I say things like that, because there are genuine victims of people that have gone through unbelievable hardship. I mean, unbelievable things. But even from those experiences, they can build really strong, really resilient individuals. I just started reading a book called, I think it's called The Escape Artist. And it's about one of the only people ever to escape from Auschwitz. There's only two guys that escaped from Auschwitz. An amazing story about this young guy who managed to escape just before the end of the war. And he saw, he saw the most horrendous things. He experienced them and he figured out what was going on, this kind of industrial scale, um, you know, genocide essentially. And he didn't let that destroy and kind of impact the rest of his life. He said, I'm gonna.
Sorry, we lost signal there. Okay, we're
Oh,
back.
good.
Hopefully I can edit this. If I can't, we're all good.
I'm sure you
Well,
can.
friends,
Either
spiritual.
that or we just finished on Nazism. So, never a bad moment. I'm sure there's somewhere you can just cut that and put your own little finish on it. It's
Oh
fine
no,
as
I'm
well.
sure it's fine. I think it's like re-recording now. It's all good. Amazing. Okay, so where were you?
Yeah, just saying that, any experience you can use it to make yourself stronger, or you can use it as a weight to bring you down. But it is a choice. And if you're struggling, if someone is struggling, it's not to say that it's easy, and they should get support. And you know, support can come in lots of different ways. And sometimes it's professional support, sometimes it's their friends, sometimes it's just supporting yourself and saying, doing the work you need to do, and not ignoring what's going on. I think that's sometimes the biggest challenge people can have is they don't want to confront what's going on in front of them, even though they know it's there. And look, it's really hard. All this stuff is hard. It's hard being a human, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's hard going to the gym 5 times a week, but you know what? It's really hard being overweight as well. So you get to choose. So like, it's just a choice. Choose your heart.
And it's so true, and that really speaks to me because obviously all of my clients, they are, everyone's been through some craziness, some, traumas and, things that they have now chosen to heal. They've now ch made that choice to go, I can stay in victim with this. I can continue repeating these patterns. I can continue letting this impact my work, my career, my happiness, whatever that is, my relationships, or I can do something about it, right? And the first step is having that awareness. Okay, that there is a problem. I acknowledge this, and then going seeking
Mm,
that support. And like you said, whether that's through looking at the brain, whether that's through psychology, whether that's through spiritual healing, it's there's so many options now for people to seek support to really
mm,
make fundamental and tangible changes in their lives. So yeah, it's really, really cool. And I love that you said that. And I love that you've the kind of the book that you mentioned and their journey, that hero's journey of escapism, and
mm,
also the founder of the technology that you use. I would class them as rebel souls. And now, like, this is
mm.
my coin, this is my phrase, right? And I want to ask all my guests that come on my podcast is, what is your view on a rebel soul? Like, what does that mean
Mm.
to you?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm not prepared for this question, but when you say things like rebel soul, I get the images of people like James Dean on a motorcycle, that kind of classic image of being a true rebel.
Mm,
And the idea of so I'm Irish, as you know, can't really tell from my accent, but the idea of rebellion is very ingrained in our DNA, for thousands of years of rebellion against the oppressor. So obviously that would have been the British for a long time, would have been Vikings, would have been Celts. There was always someone trying to come and take over. So this idea of rebelling, to me, the reason that we rebel is because we're in search of freedom.
mm,
Freedom is an emotional state, it's a physical state, it's more than anything though, it's a mind state.
mm,
So I feel like if someone is a rebel soul, and again, this is kind of on the spot, it's this search for them. In fact, you know what? It's just this is a personal thing. For me, if I was in that state of rebellion, it's because I'm rebelling against conformity. I'm rebelling against being told what to do, what to believe. I'm rebelling against someone else deciding what is right or wrong for me.
mm.
So the inverse of rebellion is, or the outcome of rebellion, in fact, is freedom. So it's like a search for freedom. That's to me what a rebel soul is. Someone looking for their freedom in
Mm.
whatever form it may come. So yeah, that feels pretty apt for me, I would say.
I love that. Yeah. And this is the thing. And I do believe that all of the people that come to me, all of my clients are rebel souls because, they are searching for their freedom, emotional freedom, mental freedom, freedom from the status
Mm.
quo of whether that is what they were told to do, the life, that we've been told to have, the 9 to 5, the state of unhappiness, the constant state of stress that society is in. And they're like, hold on a fucking minute. This is not
Yeah.
Hey, this is not what I'm meant to do. This is not how I'm meant to feel. Like, I want more, and, the rebels are the ones that are gonna do those experiments when everyone is saying they're crazy, follow a route that is unconventional, maybe spirituality, maybe diving into the brain and wearing wearing like little bands. It's the
Yeah.
people that are not afraid to yeah, break the rules, let's say, to make change, to make impact. And you're a rebel soul, absolutely, because you've done all of those things. So yeah,
Mm.
I just wanna say thank you for the answer. It was such a eloquent and beautiful answer, so I really appreciate that. And I love to slide that
It's
little
a
question in because everyone has such a
it's a great question.
purpose, an interpretation of it, right? And it's something that I've realized I'm like, I really offer spiritual growth for the rebel soul. And whether that is within your personal life, whether that's in your spiritual growth, or whether that's in your business, your purpose, what you're here to do, make impact to make impact. Um,
Mm. Well,
everyone,
let me kind of finish with maybe I don't know. Would you call this a mic drop? I certainly don't want to drop that mic
oh, let's
because
see.
it's going to have a bad
We'll be
effect on
the
the sound
judges,
quality.
that Pete. We'll be the judges.
Yeah. Well, if we
The
please do, yeah.
lukewarm, the
So
lukewarm.
the slow clap. So if you take that idea of a rebel soul, you really kind of got my mind
Mm,
working on this one. And if you take that down to an almost biological, evolutional, to the most basic level of our existence, we have to be rebel souls. We have to be because the whole process of evolution is the changes. It's the path where some part of biology went in a different direction.
mm,
It's the amoeba that became a two-celled organism that became, that connected with another one that became a plant that became et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
Every one of those steps in evolution was an act of rebellion because it was a deviation. Isn't that what rebellion is? It's going in the other direction. So
mm,
actually, someone more eloquent and knowledgeable than me could make a really good argument that by our very existence, we are a rebel entity. We have to be, or we wouldn't be here. So
mm,
then the idea of like pushing back against the norm doesn't have to be something that, for the rebels, it's something for anyone.
mm,
Again, it's that we've said it so many times, it's a choice that we get to make. and it's hard,
That's
but progress is as a result of going through hard things.
Mhm.
And that's essentially evolution is the process of rebellion. So there you go. You're onto some sort of meta biology there. I don't know quite how to
Love
explain
that.
it.
I love that. And it's such, I love a good metaphor. And it's true. It's like because everything that I do, how I work with people, it's evolution. It's for their growth. It's for their soul's growth. And then the tangible results that they see from that, right? So their emotional growth, their mental growth, their relationship growth, their business growth, whatever it is, it's all part of that evolutionary scale. So yeah, the
Mm,
rebel. And also this is the thing. It's like there's gonna be some people like that make the choice to stay stuck. And there's going to be those that make the
it's
choice
fun.
to make the jump, take that leap, jump into the unknown, overcome their fears, overcome their anxiety, whatever it is, and make that choice. And those are the ones that are going to reach their fullest potential. And that's, I think what you're here for. I think that's what I'm here for is how can we, through our own unique skills, abilities, interests, help people to reach their fullest potential. I think that's it, really.
Mm, lovely. I really, really like it. It's yeah, I could go off on a lot of tangents on that, but I think it's a beautiful way to finish.
Maybe we'll save that for another one. It was like my listeners will be like,
Yeah, I've
well,
had enough of these two.
literally, yeah. No, we could talk for ages as you probably noticed, guys. But yeah, thank you honestly so much for doing this, Pete. It's been fascinating for me to understand more about what you're doing, about the brain and what an amazing tool this is for not just like in the sports industry, not just, CEOs of huge companies, but just how this technology is going to be able to be used by the individual, by so many different industries in the future for for the betterment of ourselves. And again, the first step is
Mm,
awareness, right? So I love it. I think you guys are onto something very exciting. And I can't wait to see where you go from here.
thank you so much, and thanks for all your support on the journey.
Amazing. Well, just speak to you guys later. We'll see you in the next episode and take care.